Hey, this is Dan Harris, host of the 10% Happier podcast. I'm here to tell you about a new series we're running this September on 10% Happier. The goal is to help you do your life better. The series is called Reset. It's all about hitting the reset button in many of the most crucial areas of your life. Each week, we'll tackle a topic like how to reset your nervous system, how to reset your relationships, how to reset your career. We're going to bring on top-notch scientists and world-class meditation teachers to give you deep insights and actionable advice. It's all delivered with our trademark blend of skepticism, humor, credibility, and practicality. 10% Happier is self-help for smart people. Come join the party.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, S-H-O-W, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Hello, America. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here. The phone number, 877-973-7425. The president making an announcement in the next hour that will allegedly be about moving the Space Force to Alabama. That's what the press is saying, but until he actually makes the announcement, we will pause on that. I don't want to dive into the topic until the president's actually confirmed it and have the story get away from us. But it does appear that the president is going to be ordering Space Force One to it. Actually, no, it looks. Yep, he's going to make the announcement here in a little bit. But the documentation, it looks like, has already been signed by the White House. So We'll see if we can carry that live, though, when it happens. It undoes a decision made by the Biden administration. Given the state of football in Alabama, this is a good compensation for the state to move the Space Force to Huntsville, Alabama, where it should be anyway, honestly, with the Huntsville Space Center. But we'll get there. Just don't want to dive into it yet until everything is official with the White House. What I do want to talk about is population. You know, there was what was the guy, the philosopher Malthus, gave rise to the phrase Malthusians, that essentially the world was going to run out of resources. Paul Ehrlich wrote, I think it was Ehrlich who wrote The Population Bomb, that essentially we were going to explode in population on planet Earth and all resources would be scarce. And there were a number of free marketeers who bet Ehrlich, and he wound up losing because it turns out things are not as scarce. Remember, we were all going to run out of oil. I remember growing up in the 80s overseas. My dad worked for an oil company, and the teacher said, I'll run out of oil in the next 20 years. We're going to have to do something. The whole world is going to regress to the dark age. We're going to run out of oil. So they were predicted in the 70s, and some of them citing Paul Ehrlich. We hadn't run out of oil. We're no longer at $20, $30 a barrel, but we're actually, the price has gone down from where it was under Biden. Well, we're now reaching the other side of the equation, and it's actually not good particularly for colleges, universities, and even elementary and secondary schools. College enrollment is beginning to fall off a cliff. Go back to last week, the president and Howard Lutnick made a lot of the president's base mad by doubling down on 600,000 Chinese communist students at American colleges, universities, and they both argued, particularly led by Howard Lutnick, that if we didn't allow in 600,000 Chinese students, our universities and colleges would go out of business. And so we were doing this to subsidize our academic institutions. The president said it in a press conference that he was going to do it, and then he walked it back and said, actually, no, that's not true, that he said 600,000 because that's what Lutnick said, but it turns out we only have about 300,000 Chinese communist students in the country, and that's what we're going to do, 300,000 instead of 600,000, which is where we've been for some time, you should know, is 300,000 students from China coming into the country. You can argue it's too much, but we're not doubling it. Some schools are going to be able to maintain student population levels. State schools, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Georgia Tech, Harvard, Yale, big name schools, they're going to be able to weather this storm. But when you get to, I saw somebody note Wheaton College now has a 90% acceptance rate. Used to be a much more selective university. It has run into problems related to fidelity to Christian orthodoxy of late. And they've got a roughly, it's 96% acceptance rate, 91% women, 88.3% men, or 89.98% acceptance rate. Now, for perspective, back in 2012, the acceptance rate of Wheaton was 64%. So Wheaton's overall acceptance rate has gone from 64.7% to 89.8% in 2024. That's a warning sign for colleges that they're accepting massive amounts of students. And by the way, tuition prices are high. You know, my son only wants to go to Samford University. That's it. He thought about Auburn until he toured Samford, and he's like, that's all I want to do. Like, son, you got to boost your math grades. Keep working on math. He's not bad in math. He's got to really focus on math. He struggles with it. He's in pre-calc, and I'm afraid it's going to get away from him if he's not careful. He's got to work on it. And I'm like, you got to do well. Samford is one of those schools that still has academically rigorous administration or admissions. There are some universities, however, who they're open to the door. You want to go to college, you want to get a college degree, which, by the way, devalues the college degree. When everybody can get in and everybody does well, it's a problem. There are a number of studies out on Harvard lately in grade inflation that virtually every person now gets an A. In fact, there was a story out the other day from The Atlantic, of all places, from an academic saying that one of the big problems with Harvard's grade inflation is that no one knows what an A means anymore. And they interviewed a Harvard professor who said, I give some kids an A because they've made real improvement during the semester. I give other kids A's because I know they're introverted and they made a real effort to engage in class discussions. And I give some kids A's because they excel at the work and the tests. So you're assigning grades arbitrarily, very subjectively. It's not on an academic metric of people are understanding the work. It's you want to make them feel good and reward them because you think they did they improved over time. That's not what an A is for. Our colleges and universities aren't the only ones, though. There are more and more elementary schools. In fact, I heard of a elementary or a county here in Georgia that is, after this year, going to close some elementary schools because they don't have the population base in the county anymore to sustain them of young kids. This is happening around the country, not just in Georgia, which Georgia, the metro Atlanta area, continues to grow. But there are some parts of Georgia, for example, even in Cobb County, Georgia, where some teachers are being reassigned to other grade levels because of the dwindling population moving into a particular school district. Some are rezoning school districts to expand populations. This is happening all over the country. And it happens all the time. Demographics change, but we're headed now off the other side of the population cliff where Americans are not producing kids. Our saving grace is Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. And I'm making a joke, but it's also serious. If they have kids, you know, young women are going to want to, who follow along with Taylor Swift in her life, they're suddenly going to want to get married and have kids. And that could be a population boom in the country. It could be a good thing for us. I've actually seen a number of people who are actually serious about this, making that point that Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift getting married, having kids would actually be a good thing for society because so many young women now don't want to have kids. In fact, there was another Atlantic piece the other day. Yeah, of all places, the Atlantic, and it's like Morning Joe. It's like another early warning indicator to Democrats. They got problems. At the Atlantic, they were noting that a young woman with a college degree in nursing who makes $60,000 a year in an urban area considers it beneath her to date or marry a plumber who makes $90,000 a year because he doesn't have a college degree. So he out-earns her, but he doesn't have a college degree, therefore she's too good for him. Now, before you pick up the phone and dial me, I know there are plenty of anecdotes of young women not finding young men. I know that. I'm just telling you anecdote and data aren't the same thing, and you have these anecdotes, but there's actually the data overwhelmingly is young women with college degrees want to marry young men with college degrees, and there are fewer young men going to college because colleges still disproportionately accept women over men. I mean, take Samford, and I don't want to pick on Samford. It's where my son wants to go. It's a great college. It is a massively disproportionate female to male ratio, and in fact, the thing that gives me hope with my son is that you're now more likely as a male to be able to get a scholarship to go there, from what I've been told, because disproportionately young women want to go, and they got to boost the population of young men. But in a lot of the Ivy Leagues, they frankly do not care about sending young men to college. They don't want the young men. They're all toxic. The spillover effect, though, is going to be other colleges. Take my alma mater, Mercer University. They're going to hold their own. They've got a regional base of support, regional alumni network, but they're going to struggle more than a Harvard or a Georgia Tech or a Georgia. Then there are smaller institutions like Bruton Parker here in Georgia. There are a lot of small colleges in Georgia. They're going to start having problems. And they're going to have problems because more and more kids aren't going to want to go to the small school. Some will want to go to the small school, but the too small school, there's one in my community, Wesleyan College, one of the oldest academic institutions in the nation. It's all girls. And they're in a world of hurt academically. Their population, I think, is less than 1,000 students. The same-sex academic institutions are the ones that are going to be hurt quickest because fewer and fewer young men want to go to all male colleges. Fewer and fewer young women want to go to all female colleges. There aren't enough people to keep the lights on. This college has a massive, gorgeous, beautiful campus. But it can't sustain itself, it seems. They're not going to be alone. We've built a lot of small colleges and universities in the country, and they're going to be those like Hillsdale College, for example, where they've got a committed ideological base of support to keep kids going to it. But what about the small schools that don't have the ideological base of support? They're neither dedicated to progressive activism nor to conservatism. They're just there. They exist. Those are the ones going to be hurt. We have a dwindling population in the country. Our high watermark in population is this past year. From here on out, every year, elementary schools, in about 5 years really, because of the population birth, in about 5 years, they're going to hit a high water mark. And then every year after that, it's going to be smaller and smaller numbers. And that smaller and smaller number will trickle into middle school and then high school and then to colleges. Unless the ruling elite decide to import people, which is the problem with we're seeing in Europe now, in particular the UK. Massive importation of labor and immigrants who are making no effort to assimilate. And in fact, the progressive left over time has decided there's no reason to assimilate, that assimilation is racism, that we should allow them to keep their distinct cultures, except what you're seeing in Great Britain and elsewhere is the distinct cultures are incompatible with Western liberalism. And I don't mean liberalism in the conservative liberal split we have here, just in the Western tradition of freedom and free markets. The Western tradition of free speech and free thought, it's incompatible. And now in Great Britain, and we'll talk about this at the bottom of the hour, you got a guy who's been arrested for making jokes on the internet about transgenderism in Great Britain. There's your authoritarianism. As free speech breaks down because free speech is not compatible with the importation of immigrants and other communities, and the free speech issues that were imputed to you can't insult the Muslims, you can't insult the Pakistani immigrants and the rape gangs. has now been applied to transgenderism and the rest of it. And why? Why have they gotten to that point? Because their population, they stopped reproducing. And so they had to import migrants to prop up the community. And that has not been able to sustain them. It's fundamentally changing those cultures. And I don't know that we in this country are going to make the same mistake. The problem, though, in this country is that young men and young women aren't reproducing. And so we're actually going to start having a labor force participation rate in rapid decline over time. In fact, the Associated Press reporting over 1 million illegal immigrants no longer in the workforce. I look at that as a win. The AP says, oh, this is bad. Who's going to fill these jobs? Well, there are enough young Americans sitting on the sidelines. They can fill those jobs. But also, we got to prepare ourselves. There are going to be fewer people, which means there are going to be fewer colleges and fewer restaurants and fewer places to go as the numbers dwindle over time, unless people start reproducing more. Hello there. It is Eric Erickson here. A buddy of mine out in Oklahoma just sent me a screenshot of a school out there in Tulsa where if you make less than a 70, you can retake your test within a week. Which I guess I can kind of see that if you're studying, you've screwed up something, you can go back and do it. But I don't know that we're really encouraging academic rigorousness when you do that. And I just, I tell my kids all the time, like, so they went to a small classical education school. They had to learn Latin. It was all Socratic method. A lot of their classes, they had to stand and they had to argue and discuss and debate and learn to write a thesis and all that sort of stuff. It was very rigorous education. And my oldest wasn't sure that she was getting the best education because she didn't have all the advanced STEM stuff. And there wasn't really a robot. There was, but it wasn't. Computers were not the latest and greatest. And they didn't have all the options and extracurricular stuff that some of the bigger private schools and public schools had. And man, she's in college now and just running circles around kids just because she had real math. She didn't have Common Core math. She already had to read. A lot of the stuff they're now reading in college and her Great Books program were things they had to read, and they had to learn how to argue and come up with cogent points and build paragraphs and stuff that the kids that she's with now don't have to. There is something to be said for a classical education model that some private schools, particularly classical Christian education models, have, that some of these schools, they're just not really preparing kids for college, and the colleges as a result are dumbing themselves down to meet the kids where they are as opposed to being academically rigorous. We need academically rigorous institutions. Now, Americans for Prosperity has actually been pushing for real education reform to ensure academic rigorousness in the country. They actually right now, though, would love to get you engaged to take one of their 250,000 steps for freedom. It's not you taking 250,000 steps. It's just you taking one step, but 250,000 of you committing to take one step for freedom in the country. You can find out more by going to AFPvolunteer.com. The 250,000 Steps for Freedom Challenge is set up for the 250th anniversary of the United States as an independent nation. Our 250th birthday is coming up. They want to prepare. They want to commit us again to the freedoms that our founders advocated for. That is the negative liberty approach, that Congress and Washington staying out of your way makes you more free, as opposed to them giving you everything and then putting you under strings and controlling your life while you claim to be free. Take one of the steps for freedom. Find out more at AFPvolunteer.com. Americans for Prosperity is the largest and leading grassroots group in the country. They happen to be conservatives. They'd love to have you on their side. AFPvolunteer.com is where you want to go. Check it out today. Hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. I want to go to the phones, 877-973-7425. Amir, you're up next. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Hey, Eric. This is Amir. Yes, I'm good. How are you doing?
Great. What's going on?
Listen, just before the break, you were saying how high schools and colleges are dumbing down the educational system just to get the people in and all this. But yet somehow Lutnick wants to make sure they don't go belly up and, we need to make sure that they get their piece of pie. And I'm like, what's wrong with them going belly up? What's wrong with them price negotiating? What's wrong with them accepting maybe Americans
right.
or people that already live here that are not having A-list parents financially to back them up? to take him. I mean, I'm not fond of this. As far as I'm concerned, all schools, colleges especially, they should receive zero of our money. I mean, zero.
Look, I'm glad you say this.
Wokeness going on, and we had to fight them with courts and this and this and this, and then finally they caved in, and they're still getting their money.
I think the single greatest thing that we as a nation could do is get rid of the student loan program. And I don't say that lightly. I benefited from student loans. But the student loan program, as it currently is structured, allows colleges and universities to raise costs disproportionate to inflation. Colleges and universities raise their tuition higher than any other institution in pacing tied to inflation. And they can do it because of student loans. You don't have to feel the weight of the student loan until after you're out of college, and then you're overwhelmed with it. I think you get rid of the program, you immediately rein in the problem. We've got to stop subsidizing so many colleges and universities. Now, listen, I got friends who work at some colleges and universities that are quite conservative. They do exist out there. But if your institution exists just because of the student loan program, you don't actually have a compelling case ideological or academically to bring kids to you. It's time for you to consider winding down and selling your property. Do something. We're in population decline at this point, and just using the government to prop up institutions is a waste of taxpayer dollars. Now, we got to get to what happened in London. London. I noticed Danger Mouse is now available on Netflix. I watch some of them. I'm a big when I was a kid, Danger Mouse, the original Danger Mouse, was one of my favorite cartoons. Always started with London. Well, there's something wrong with the UK. And I want to begin here. One of the unique distinctions of the United States that makes us superior to every other country on planet Earth is the First Amendment. The First Amendment, as a worded instrumentality of law, provides a distinction to the United States that separates us from every other country on planet Earth. And there are countries that have modeled our First Amendment and, in fact, take, for example, the Soviet Union, made a much more expansive version of their First Amendment. And yet, as implemented by design in the Soviet Union and in China and elsewhere, it completely fails. Ours is so simply worded. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, our Supreme Court, I think, has screwed up to some degree the establishment of religion, make no law establishing a religion, because by design, secularism is a form of religion. And we're seeing the Supreme Court come around on this. The conservative justices are recognizing that a defaulting to secularism is establishing a religion. It's just a secular religion. And we're seeing a Supreme Court shift in the right direction on this. But abridging the freedom of speech. For a time, political speech in this country was more regulated than pornographic speech. There's been a real shift, I think, rightly so by the Supreme Court, that you can have greater regulation of pornography, but you got to have less regulation of political speech. The First Amendment sets us apart. The First Amendment, particularly the freedom of speech, is uniquely American. And you can't appreciate that until you start looking into the things that are happening in the UK, which is our ancestor country, where many of our ideas, particularly related to the Bill of Rights, came from. But in the UK, they have no written constitution, and things can change over time, and acts of parliament can undo prior acts of parliament. There's a comedian in Great Britain, Graham Linehan. I don't know him. I don't know anything about him. This blew up this morning. This is wild. Let me read for you the beginning of his Substack. Something odd happened before I even boarded the flight in Arizona. When I handed over my passport at the gate, the official told me I didn't have a seat and had to be reticketed. At the time, I thought it was just the sort of innocent snafu that makes air travel such a joy, but in hindsight, it was clear I'd been flagged. Someone, somewhere, probably wearing unconvincing makeup and his sister's wife's mom's underwear, had made a phone call. The moment I stepped off the plane at Heathrow, 5 armed police officers were waiting. Not 1, not 2, 5. They escorted me to a private area and told me I was under arrest for 3 tweets. In a country where pedophiles escape sentencing, where knife crime is out of control, where women are assaulted and harassed every time they gather to speak, the state has mobilized 5 armed officers to arrest a comedy writer for this tweet. And no, I promise you, I'm not making this up. This is what he tweeted. If a trans-identified male is in a female-only space, he is committing a violent, abusive act. Make a scene, call the cops, and if all else, punch him in the balls. That's what he tweeted. And then he tweeted another tweet, and it was a picture of a rally, of a trans rights rally. And his tweet says, "A photo you can smell." And then a follow-up to that tweet was, "I hate them, misogynists and homophobes, F them." He writes, "When I first saw the cops, I actually laughed. I couldn't help myself. Don't tell me you've been sent by trans activists." The officers gave no reaction, and this was the theme throughout much of the day. Among the rank and file, there was a sort of polite bafflement. Entirely professional and even kind, but most had absolutely no idea what any of this was about. Kind because the officers saw how upset I was. When they began reading me my rights, the red mist descended and I came close to becoming one of these police body cam videos where you can't believe the perp isn't just doing what he's told. And they treated me gently after that. They even arranged for a van to meet me on the tarmac so I didn't have to be perp walked through the airport like a terrorist. Small mercies. At Heathrow Police Station, my belt, bag, and devices were confiscated. Then I was shown into a small green-tiled cell with a bunk, a silver toilet in the corner, and a message from Crime Stoppers on the ceiling next to a concave mirror that was presumably there to make you reflect on your life choices. By some miracle, perhaps because I hadn't slept on the flight, I managed to doze off. After the premier economy seat in which I'd spent 10 hours, it was actually a relief to stretch out. That passed the time, though I kept waking up, wondering if this was actually happening. Later, during the interview itself, the tone shifted. The officer conducted it, asked about each of these terrible tweets in turn with a sort of earnest intensity usually reserved for discussing something serious like, I don't know, crime. I explained that the punch tweet was a serious point made with a joke. Men who enter women's spaces are abusers and they need to be challenged every time. The punch in the bollocks spit was about the height difference between men and women. The bollocks being closer to punch level for a woman defending her rights and certainly not a call to violence. Not one of my best, as one of the female officers said, "We're not that small." He mentioned trans people. I asked him what he meant by the phrase. People who felt their gender is different than what was assigned at birth. I said, assigned at birth, our sex isn't assigned. He called it semantics. I told him he was using activist language. Eventually, a nurse came to check on me and found my blood pressure was over 200, stroke territory. The stress of being arrested for jokes was literally threatening my life, so I was escorted to a hospital, where I write this now after spending 8 hours under observation. The doctor suggested the high blood pressure was stress-related combined with long-haul travel and lack of movement. I feel it may have also been a contributing factor that I've now spent 8 years being targeted by trans activists working in tandem with police in a dedicated, persistent harassment campaign because I refuse to believe that lesbians have male anatomy. The police themselves, for the most part, were consistently decent through the farce. Some were even Father Ted fans. Thank God the Catholic Church never had with the police the special relationship granted to trans activists. The male officers were mostly polite but clearly nonplussed by the politics of it all, just doing their jobs, however insane the job was. The female officers seemed more tuned in to what was actually happening. One mentioned the Sandy Peggy case in a certain way, and I realized I was among friends even if they couldn't admit it. I looked at the single bail condition. I'm not to go on Twitter. That's it. No threats, no speeches about the seriousness of my crime, just a legal gag order designed to shut me up while I'm in the UK, and a demand I face a further interview in October. This is it. It turns out that it was trans activists targeted the guy, and the police arrested him when he got off the plane. Ross Douthat, writing in the New York Times, says this is managerial multiculturalism, an attempt to preserve the peace of a diverse society by sacrificing the liberty of speech and association. And the fortress nationalists and liberals can claim a certain vindication on this point, given that right now the main alternative adaptation to mass migration and aging native populations is what you might call managerial multiculturalism, which tries to preserve the post-1989 vision through means that look increasingly illiberal, involving the policing of speech and debate, especially with explicit limitations on acceptable opinion and even jail time if you step too far out of line. This is how you end up with Britain trying to suppress the ethnic and religious tensions in its increasingly diverse society by arresting people for social media posts and online trolling, or Justin Trudeau's Canadian government engaging in debanking and other methods to smother populist protests, or German authorities contemplating an outright ban on the Nationalist Alternative for Germany party. Managerial multiculturalism is a model with clear appeal to certain progressive elites because it imagines that the most utopian ambitions of the post-Cold War era can still be realized if you just give the technocrats a little more power to police disinformation, suppress hate speech, and sometimes remove inconvenient parties and candidates from the ballot. By the way, in Germany, they've disqualified the Alternative for Germany party. They've disqualified two of their candidates. Do you know what the crime was? Can you guess? I'm not making it up. You know what the crime was in Germany? They have disqualified two conservative candidates from office in two separate cities for local elections because they have on the campaign trail praised the Lord of the Rings. Yes, they praised the Lord of the Rings. Friends, I need to tell you something. There are illiberal members of the left and the right in this country who wish to curtail the First Amendment. It's not just on the left. You think it's on the left because you surround yourself mostly, if you're listening now, to conservative media, so you hear about the left, but it's happening. There are some on the far right who want to do the same as well, particularly when it relates to Jews these days. The First Amendment sets the United States apart. If you find anyone who tells you we need to curtail our First Amendment, you run from that person and vote them out of office if you can. Otherwise, we wind up like what's happening in Europe. The First Amendment and the Second set the United States apart, far for the better from everyone else. Free speech matters, and you can see why with what's happening in Great Britain right now. You know, one of the wild trends these days is the mainstream media being some of the biggest critics of free speech and just flat out lying. Mamdani in New York actually has said he's a socialist and says he wants to seize the means of production. And in the New York Times, this is how they characterize it. The closest Mr. Mamdani gets to socialism is in his belief in treating people more equitably. That's how they claim it, despite himself saying he's a socialist who wants to seize the means of production. And in Great Britain, of course, they cover up numerous stories. Let me just read you some of these examples there that have gotten very little coverage in Great Britain, but a lot of coverage here. In one example, the same judge sentenced a woman to 31 months in jail for a mean tweet that she deleted 4 hours later. The same judge sentenced someone who participated in mob violence to just 20 months. Back in 2023, a 71-year-old retired police officer posted a tweet in the United Kingdom pushing back on anti-Semitism at anti-Israel rallies. The next day, 6 officers showed up to search his home and arrest him. He was held in a cell for 8 hours and interrogated. and then released with just a citation, finally admitting it was a mistake. In another recently revealed case that highlighted the backwards and selective enforcement, UK police arrested a Jewish counter-protester last September because he held up a sign mocking Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. 6 police officers searched his home and charged him with causing racially or religiously aggravated harassment because Hezbollah supporters were offended by the picture. Hezbollah, by the way, is in Great Britain a designated terrorist group. This is happening time and time again in Great Britain. Again, free speech is unique to us. This is why the New York Times and other left-wing outlets have gone after disinformation, claims of disinformation, claims of misinformation. They want the monopoly. They want to control speech. And they want you shut down so you can't contradict them. They want you punished if you contradict them. And time again, they get stories wrong. It's why you got to stand up for free speech. Now, listen, I know I'm preaching to the crowd here, but you got to understand there are those on the right now who also oppose free speech. They want you punished for saying things. You've got to be willing to allow people to say stuff and to disagree with them, but let them speak, or it ends badly for all of us. Rounding people up and harassing them is not a good thing. It's one reason I'm a little bit concerned with when the Trump administration, for example, wants to deport college students who are here on student visas who have spoken up and saying they disagree with American policy. Now, I'm not talking about the people championing jihad. I'm talking about the people who say they disagree with certain American policies. And I think we got to be careful here. We all need to be ruthlessly committed to free speech. Now, I'm committed to the Eden Pure Thunderstorm as well because I know it works. I've got one in my travel bag. I head to New York City tonight for a conference, and I got it in my travel bag because it's New York. I'm sure it'll smell. So if you go to EdenPureDeals.com and you put in the discount code ERIC3, ERICK3, you can get 3 of them, save $200. You get them for less than $200, and they just work. EdenPureDeals.com, the discount code ERIC3. They're an air purifier, so they get rid of dust and pollen and pet dander. They kill 99.9% of bacteria and viruses that go through the machine because it generates plasma that kills all the bacteria and viruses. And then it generates ozone that flows out into the room, touches the ionized particles you and I know as odors, and wipes them out. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code is ERIC3, ERICK3. Get one for upstairs, downstairs, your basement, your travel bag, your RV. You can hold it in your hand, plug it up with a USB cord, plug it into the wall. It just works. It'll work for you to wipe out odors. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code ERIC, ERICK, the number 3.